So a couple of months ago, I was talking with my brother-in-law, and we were just having a good conversation. And at some point during the conversation, his daughter, my niece, who's about 5, came up and she started to interrupt, and she was asking her dad things. And he just put his hand down. He said, "Nope, wait." And then she kept going, and then eventually he put his finger out, "No, no, no." And after 4 or 5 times of this, he stopped talking to me for a moment. He got down at her level, looked at her in her eyes, and said, "Honey, I'm talking with your Uncle Stephen. You need to wait." And then he stood back up, continued talking to me, and it was probably maybe just 30 more seconds. We were both ready to let her have her moment, but he just wanted to correct her and then let her make her wait just a little longer and then see what was going on. But he was doing so because he wants her to know it's not polite just to interrupt people. You have to wait your turn. In July, I had what I was not looking forward to, my doctor's appointment for my annual physical. And I thought, oh no, they're going to make me get on that scale. So I did what most of us do. I wore the lightest pair of shorts I had. I took out the keys and the phone. I wore my Birkenstock sandals like it's gonna make a difference. Whatever damage is done has been done. Anyway, there was a number that wasn't very kind. I thought it was pretty rude, and I told him to get a new scale. So I go into to the room, and I wait for the doc, and Doc comes in, and he says, "Father Stephen, we have got to do something about your weight." And the thing is he was very kind. He wasn't rude. He wasn't mean. He's a good Catholic man, and he wants me to be healthy. He wants me to be healthy for you. But that meant that he was going to say something that I didn't want to hear, which is, "Dude, all the good work you've done the past 2 years is gone." And I'm like, "I know. Starting from ground zero again." Here's the thing. There's no way he could have been more kind. And yet, I still felt bad. There was still shame in my heart. Because I'm like, man, here I go again. I'm still struggling with the same stuff. I think for us at times, we forget that Jesus Christ, that our God, will correct us like my brother-in-law did for his daughter, because he wants to see us learn how to behave well. And God does it in a way that's loving and kind. And just because it's loving and kind doesn't mean it's not going to sting. Sometimes even God's loving conviction in our heart about some behaviors or sins that exist are still going to hurt, because it produces shame. But that doesn't mean that God shouldn't do it, because he wants what's best for you and me. He wants us to be free, and he wants us to live in his life and in his love. And sometimes that means, friends, that he is going to challenge us in difficult ways, just like Jesus does in our gospel. You know, as a priest, I always question, when do I do that? You know, when, because we want good news, and so it's challenging for me to figure out at what weekends do I challenge you in very kind, loving ways, but also because I want you to be filled with God's life and love. I want you to be holy. When do I do it? And sometimes it's hard to decide, and some things are hard to say. And I'm going to talk about 2 that, one I've talked about before many times, another I have not talked about at all, but 2 examples of difficult things for priests to say to their people to encourage us to grow in holiness. This past week, I was with the priest at the priest convocation, and I was talking to one of my brothers, and he was sharing with me this encounter with a young couple preparing for marriage and about their first meeting. And in that first meeting, it happened that it came out that they'd been living together. They have been cohabitating for some time. And so Father said to them, "You know, I just want to encourage you over these next several months to live in separate rooms." And Their response was interesting, and I'll be discreet, but they basically said, "Father, are you saying we can't share the same bedroom?" And he said, "Yes." And they said, "Is it sinful if we are?" And he said, "Yes." And they said, no one's ever told them that before, which I found surprising. That no one, they just thought it's what you do. You live together, then you get married. And he said, "I'm sorry to tell you, you can't do it. Here's how you're called to live until you're married. And we want you to have a beautiful, holy, married life together." And part of that is that when you enter into marriage, there's a commitment that you're not just going to leave. That doesn't exist until you're married. That's why we do it. That's why we encourage it. That's part of it. Another thing that's hard to talk about from the pulpit, and you know I've talked about it many times, is going to Mass. Several weeks ago, I was answering questions for a group of adults from this parish, and it was a very public forum. And I was answering questions about the liturgy and about Mass and different things like that. And at some point, and I never said anything directly about it, but it became clear that I was saying we need to be here every week. And so one of the ladies raised her hand, and she said, "Father, can you be a little bit more clear? Are you saying that it's a sin if you don't go to Mass every weekend?" And I said, "Yes, it is." What was fascinating in that moment was how surprised she was. It was clear that that had never been told to her before, that she didn't know that that was a sin. And let me be clear, right? If you have a child who's puking their guts out because they have the stomach virus, staying home is called being a good parent, okay? If we have an elderly person who, like it's an ice storm and it's too dangerous for you to drive, and then you don't want to risk falling on the pavement and you decide to stay home, that's called making a good, reasonable decision. And if you ever wonder if you're making the right decision, just ask me, I'll tell you. I'll help you discern it. But here's examples that are not good reasons for missing. You stay up too late Saturday night, and you know that your parish live streams, and so I'll just have coffee and watch on the TV today. That would be sinful, because that's just convenient. And we can't miss Mass because of convenience. The other one, this is the one that's very prevalent today. You all know how much I love sports, but any extracurricular activity for our children that leads us to miss Mass, that would be sinful, because we have a plethora of ways of finding out parishes. We have these things in our pockets that have access to the internet that can tell us a church in the area we are that has a Mass that will work for you if you're traveling. But yes, it's sinful to miss Mass. Jesus is very clear in our gospel. There are behaviors that we all do that we can't do. If your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. If your foot causes you to sin, cut it off. If your eye causes you to sin, pluck it out. See, Jesus wants us to pay attention to the sinful behaviors that exist in our lives so that we can change them. But the problem, friends, is this. Too often it's the case that rather than changing our behaviors, we change our beliefs to accommodate our behaviors. So rather than changing our sinful behavior, we change our beliefs to accommodate our behaviors. As an example, I love coffee. I don't think it's an appropriate decision for me personally, financially, to go to Starbucks every morning. Well, let's just say I decided to go to Starbucks every morning for the month of September. I have a decision to make now. Am I going to change my behavior next month and say, you know what? I went to Starbucks way too much last month. I'm not going anymore. I need to save some money. Or I'll change my belief. I'll say, you know what? I can afford it. Who cares? I'll just keep going. And then I keep doing the thing, which is getting Starbucks every day. The reason I use the two examples I used today is because they're examples of how our society has changed its beliefs to accommodate behaviors. And I spent some time researching this yesterday to make sure that I was right. So, anyone here know, in the 1950s, how many couples cohabitated before marriage? What percentage? 0.7%. That's not 1%, that's less than. It's 0.7%. How many couples today cohabitate before they're married? More than 70%. I want to be very clear. I'm not trying to single couples out. I'm not saying that your marriage is doomed if you've cohabitated. None of that. What I am pointing out, though, is that our society has changed its beliefs to accommodate its behaviors because we just think that's normal. And it's maybe not causation, but there's at least correlation between the fact that cohabitation has risen and skyrocketed and divorce rate. There's a relationship between those. And we want, the church is not trying to be a bad church or a church that is overly concerned about your life. We want you to have a successful, happy marriage. That's why we have these goals and these requirements or calling you on things so you can have a good marriage. Anyone know how many Catholics went to Mass weekly in the 1950s? Every week. 3 out of 4. 75% of Catholics went to Mass every week in the 1950s. How many Catholics go to Mass every week today? Less than 25% of Catholics go to Mass every week today. I hope you're seeing, it's pretty clear and pretty obvious. We've changed our beliefs to accommodate our behaviors. And Jesus is very clear this weekend. We have got to stop changing our beliefs to accommodate our sinful behaviors. And every one of us here, me and you, I'm with you in this. All of us have our own sins, have our own struggles that we deal with, that we are called to conversion. And Jesus wants us to be free. And so my hope and my prayer for you this morning is this, is that you allow the Holy Spirit to convict your heart to say, that is the sin. And if one is coming to mind right now, that's it. That is the sin that the Lord wants to heal and help you overcome. And maybe that's a good confession, you know? Whatever it is, invite the Lord's grace and help into your life so that you can be free and so that you can grow in holiness and be the person God has called you to be. Jesus is very clear. We should expect our Lord at times to correct us. It's because he loves us. And St. Peter says it the best way, and this comes from 2 Peter chapter 3, verses 14 through 15. Brothers and sisters, make every effort to be found without sin. Nevertheless, remember that God's patience is directed towards your salvation.